Welcome on the Ballot, Ballotpedia, where we connect people to politics by providing neutral, nonpartisan, and reliable information on our government, how it works, and where it's headed. I'm Jeff Pallay. Thanks for being with us. All right, today we're going to talk a little more about ballot measures, one of our favorite topics here at Ballotpedia, and we want to delve a little bit into what the future is going to bring. So we've talked a lot about ballot measures over the last few weeks, the results, what happened, what was to come for 2024. So now that we know what's transpired, let's start looking ahead to what the results of this year's election might be able to foreshadow us for the future. What better person to talk to than Ryan Byrne, back as always. So hey Ryan, how's it going?
Hey Jeff, it's going pretty well.
All right, let's recap for our listeners what happened on Tuesday. So we're recording this on Thursday, November 7th. We've got a pretty good sense of what happened now. So looking back on the election a couple days ago, give us a quick little recap of the ballot measures landscape.
Yeah, so back on election day, voters decided on 146 ballot measures across 41 states. And most of those we now know the results of. There are still about 14 that are a little too close to call. With the big topics, we saw some interesting results. The abortion ballot measures, they passed in most states. Both few were defeated. RCV kind of saw a wide defeat at the state level, though had some success at the local level. And, there's a whole more arrays of topics that I'm sure we can discuss.
Yeah, so what does the approval rate look like so far compared to prior years? I know, like you said, there's a number still open, but, one thing you and I have often talked about with ballot measures is that voters are often confused about ballot measures, which is one of the reasons why we're here to help make that easier. But the longer the ballot, the more ballot measures that are appearing before voters. We've kind of historically seen that when push comes to shove, if a voter is confused, they kind of default to no. So what are we seeing with our approval rates this year? Have we any early indication about what the sort of appetite was for voters on the whole?
Yeah, so approval rates during these kind of general election years is somewhere between 60-65%. Last cycle was actually 68%, and currently we're kind of around the upper 50s. Granted, we still have some left to be called, but if we say they break 50-50, we're around 58%. So less were approved this year than typical.
I mean, I think we've seen a handful of measures that are of the topic type that were typically defeated. And I think, when you combine all these trends together, that's probably going to contribute that. So, for instance, we know that a higher number of the most expensive measures were defeated. So normally, when we think about the top 10 ballot measures and the ones that got the most money, more often than not, they win of the most expensive measures anyway. And this year, we saw a handful of the most expensive measures see the higher money side lose. We also saw, for what looks like the first time, some minimum wage measures are losing. So maybe talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, the minimum wage issue is an interesting one because they're always somewhat prominent, but they generally pass. So since 1996, voters have actually decided on 28 of these ballot measures. And in 1996, 2 were defeated, but then since then, there's been, 26 more, and all of them have been approved. So 26 since 1996, and then 2024 has now kind of stopped that trend. In Massachusetts, voters rejected a ballot initiative to increase the minimum wage for tipped workers to kind of match the standard minimum wage. And in California, they were voting on what is the highest state minimum wage ever proposed, $18 an hour. And that one's too close to call, but it's currently at about 48% yes, so it might go down for defeat as well. And then meanwhile, there are a bunch of minimum wage measures in other states that have like Republican trifectas and things like that. And a lot of them proposed $15 an hour, like Alaska and Missouri, and those were approved. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic.
That is really interesting. And that sort of leads us kind of into the next topic, which is, what do we learn from this year's ballot measure election results? And one thing we've seen, forever in the ballot measures world is there are typically sort of pilots. There are test cases where a topic comes up, an activist group or an organization or a group of individuals or a state or someone gets an idea for a new topic and they will try it in a state. This is the whole concept of federalism and laboratories of democracy. You try it in a state or two. And if it seems like it's successful, then it might scale out to other states. So we're always kind of keeping our eye out for situations where either we're seeing the early shapings of a new future topic or, seeing a test case being scaled out. So the two really obvious examples I think that we saw this year were, the large number of abortion ballot measures and the large number of non-citizen voting ballot measures. So talk a little bit about those two topics as how they sort of fit into that paradigm of pilot cases being scaled out.
Yeah, both of them have been around for a couple years, so I think this year is probably more so a case of them starting to really jumpstart putting these on a lot of state ballots, kind of like the early days of marijuana, where, like in 2012, there were a couple, they were successful, and then each year kind of kept increasing for a while. With the abortion ballot measures, right, we saw of the 10 to create state constitutional rights, 7 of them were approved. But there's still other states where they could kind of do this in the future, including states with the initiative. So there's actually 8 other states with citizen-initiated constitutional amendments where they have either not decided on them or they were rejected this year, like Nebraska, South Dakota, and Florida. But Democratic-controlled legislatures may also decide to put these on the ballot for various reasons. States like Oregon could, right? Or a few like that. And, we saw that this year as well. Maryland, New York, some states put constitutional amendments on the ballot. They're not directly from citizens.
So what you're describing is that, we've seen right to abortion ballot measure be successful. And, future cycles, we might see more states, and there are still a handful of them out there, 8 of them, like you said, with initiatives, and then 11 with the legislators that could do it. And that's kind of like the inverse of what we saw a few years back, where there was a sort of let's call it a run on what were called personhood ballot measures, where, for a few cycles in a row, those were some pretty popular ballot measures that were being put on the ballot. To sort of step back for a moment for listeners, if you're a Republican-led state and you're a Democratic Party group or activist, your avenue for policy change is often going to be through the initiative, if you happen to have the initiative. Arizona would be an example of that. Arkansas would be an example of that. And the same would go with the other side of that. So there's 16 states that have initiated constitutional amendments available to them. So you're kind of playing a little bit of a sort of jigsaw puzzle here, trying to figure out, okay, well, which states have initiated constitutional amendments, which states already have a right to abortion and the Constitution, and then you can kind of do by process of elimination where we might see these in future years to come. And there's a similar situation with non-citizen voting bans. So talk about that a little bit, Ryan.
Yeah, so non-citizen voting bans are also one that kind of started with the initiative process. The original couple from a couple years ago were citizen initiated, but we really saw legislatures kind of pick up on them this year. And all of them were approved across the states where they were on the ballot. So we could see legislatures kind of continue with that trend. We were kind of looking into this, and it looks like there's 17 states where legislatures are Republican controlled that don't currently have these non-citizen voting bans. So it would make sense for them to probably pursue that in future years. So I think we can definitely expect to see more next cycle.
That makes sense, right? So you're talking places like Indiana or Kansas or Arkansas. What are some other topics that we saw this cycle that seemed like they were maybe a sort of first of its kind initiative or ballot measure that might, based on its results, be a little bit of a harbinger of things we could see in future years to come?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I actually don't know if there's like one particular measure. Of course, it's always a little hard to tell. In the past, we kind of have to see how it unravels. But one thing that I did find kind of fascinating that isn't really directly answering your question, Jeff, but in some states where, we often hear about like these more progressive leaning ballot initiatives, but in some of the states that have a ballot initiative process, but our Democratic trifectas like Washington and Oregon, we saw conservative groups kind of make a play on criminal justice issues. And then in Washington, issues related to energy and taxes. So I think there is a case to be made that in some of those states, you could see more ballot measures along those lines in future years, especially if the legislatures aren't addressing those topics.
As a reminder for listeners, we do already have certified measures for 25-26. There are already 4 ballot measures certified for the 2026 cycle, including a minimum wage initiative in Oklahoma, a couple of already certified ones in California, and one in Missouri. So that cycle is kind of already underway, and we already know that more things will come in 2025 as well.
Right. And I'll interject, Jeff, that 2024, we actually should be increasing that to 6 because Nevada has this 2-vote requirement
Yep.
for citizen-initiated constitutional amendments. And since voters passed the abortion initiative and the voter ID initiative, both of those need to be approved again.
Yeah, that's right. Every state has their very individual and unique quirks of how they run their ballot measures process. So another thing that really impacts these future cycles is turnout. So the number of signatures required to qualify a ballot measure varies and is set at the state level, and each state has a different requirement for how they set that. Maybe it's based on the number of votes cast in a presidential election. Maybe it's based on the number of registered voters. Maybe it's based on a variety of different issues. So there's been a lot of talk this week about a high turnout in the presidential election this year. So what might that mean for future ballot measures, Ryan?
Yeah, I think we can take a look at 2020 when we're thinking about this as we're kind of awaiting those final certified election results. In 2020, we really saw the signature requirements jump because, like you said, they're tied to turnout. And especially in states where they are based on just kind of raw turnout that happens every 2 years or the presidential election, a lot of them are based on elections that happen during midterms. So those states won't necessarily be affected. There's probably about 8 to 10 of them where we can expect an effect. But, these are some big states like Florida, for example, did voter, and Florida's based on the presidential election. If turnout increased in Florida, it's going to require more. They already require 890,000 signatures, so it could be even more next cycle. So turnout definitely has these downstream effects on how easy or hard it is to get an initiative on the ballot.
Yeah, we saw in 2022 there were only 30 initiated ballot measures, and that was following years before that: 43 initiated measures in 2020, 68 in 2018, 76 in 2016, 40 in 2014. 61 in 2012. So the 30 we had in 22 was a really low initiative number. And, but there's a lot of variables that went into that, the pandemic, the difficulties for campaigns to find signature gatherers, things like that. There's a lot that went into that. But the landscape that we're finding for groups to qualify initiatives, it's gotten a lot harder. That's the kind of the big takeaway that we're getting at. Now, harder is kind of a relative term here, because in the cases of initiatives, what harder essentially means is more expensive. It just means that it's going to be more expensive for campaigns to get an initiative to qualify for the ballot, whether that's more expensive in terms of time or more expensive in terms of hiring petition management companies to qualify something. So speak a little, Ryan, about that, about the cost per signature required. How did that look this year compared to prior years?
Yeah, I think you're right, definitely. When we say that a process can be more difficult due to increase in signatures or various laws passed, what that usually means is more resource intensive. So this year, the signature costs, they've been continuing to climb each cycle, and they continued to climb this cycle as well. So it takes quite a bit of money on average to get a measure on the ballot. I think this year it was almost $15 per signature, which is an increase from last cycle when it was almost 13, and then in 2020, 8, in 2018, 6.5. So it just keeps going up for, a whole range of reasons.
There was more than $1 billion put into campaign finance around ballot measures this cycle. So certainly attract a lot of resources, attract a lot of interest. We love covering it. You do a great job, Ryan, with your team. It's always great to have you on the show, and we will certainly be back to talk a heck of a lot more about ballot measures in the weeks, months, and years to come. So Ryan, thanks for all your work and coverage this week, and good to see you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And for listeners, you can hear a little bit more from us tomorrow as we wrap up our 2-week sprint around this election 2024 season. We appreciate all of your attention to these episodes. We hope you've been enjoying them. If you have any feedback about how these episodes have gone, don't hesitate to email us or leave comments in the show notes. Otherwise, we'll be back tomorrow. Don't forget to hit subscribe on whatever platform you're listening. I'm Jeff Pallay, and thanks for being here.